You're listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, we're discussing Rattan Cane, which is track number 4 on 2012's Failed States. And this is our 8th Failed States episode. So it's kind of funny that this is the album that we're the farthest on, but probably the last album we'll finish for what are perhaps obvious reasons.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me what the last song is going to be, and I'm like, come on, really? Like,
Yeah.
it's pretty obvious. This song is really cool. It's dedicated to the quote-unquote emos in Iraq and the punks in Aceh, Indonesia. And we'll get into more details found within the specific examples. But around 10 years ago, a series of killings began occurring in Iraq targeting so-called emos, who were folks who would wear skinny jeans, have spiky or alternative looking haircuts that were outside the mainstream of acceptable fashion and grooming standards in the society.
Mm-hmm.
They were perceived to be LGBTQIA or something else. And the other story is in 2011, some cops in Aceh, Indonesia, raided a punk show, arrested 65 people, gave them forced haircuts, and sent them to re-education camps. This song is about these two events sort of like blended into one song.
Right.
And so Rattan, for anybody out there who doesn't know, just to talk about the terms in the title. So rattan is a kind of palm tree. About 20% of rattan palms are used in Southeast Asia in making things like wicker furniture and baskets and canes and woven mats. And rattan canes are pretty valuable non-timber forest products, which is I thought was pretty interesting to find out. And despite increasing attempts in the last 30 years for commercial cultivation, rattan products pretty much universally come from wild harvested plants. There's also tons of endangerment to rattan because of deforestation and human overexploitation of resources in the world, which is pretty on brand for human society, as we've discussed many times on this show. Another name for rattan is a Malacca cane or a Manila cane due to the trade origins from where they originate. Caning is a form of corporal punishment where a number of hits with one of these canes is applied to somebody who is accused of a crime's bare or clothed buttocks or hands on the palms. So it's a really common form of punishment throughout history. Caning on the knuckles and shoulders also occurs, that I found out, and caning can also be applied to the soles of feet. It's a really varying degree of corporal punishment. There can be a couple of light hits, like for a kid at school, but there can also be like really wounding cuts and hits that happen with like a heavy soaked rattan as like a judicial punishment meted out by courts and things like that.
Right. A lot of our grandparents probably shared stories about being busted over the knuckles with like a meter stick or something like that. But from what really stands out to me, preparing for this episode brought a flashback of a really big news story in the early 1990s, Greg. So I wonder if you remember this as well, the caning of Michael P. Fay.
Yes.
He was an American who was charged with both theft and vandalism in Singapore. There was widespread coverage in the American media, and this single event threatened to upend the friendly relationships between the US and Singapore. And eventually, even Bill Clinton got involved, and he helped reduce the number of strikes that were administered from 6 to 4.
What a diplomatic effort.
Yeah. And, I even remember talking about this in school. So the varying examples of the wrapping over the knuckles versus a very severe punishment here that would, leave permanent scars. So Michael Fay described the actual caning. He said it was actually pretty scary at first because the flogger who tested the cane, he said, I didn't hear him say one word through the whole thing. He was bent over with his butt stuck out. He had his hands and feet buckled, and he was naked except for just a protective rubber cushion tied to his back so the cane would only hit him on his butt and wouldn't hit him anywhere else. So Faye said they go count one, and you hear them yell it really loud. And after a few seconds later, they come in. I guess I would call it charging at you, with a rattan cane so he can get a little power behind him. You hear a crack when it hits you. About a second went by, and then it just burned all through my body, and it hurts. It does hurt.
Mm.
He said when the four stroke was delivered, he was immediately unbuckled from the trestle and taken to a cell to recover. And this was, obviously publicized, but it was also parodied from everything from like The Simpsons, Saturday Night Live. Weird Al made reference to it
Oh,
in a
wow.
song. And then the ECW, for some wrestling fans, probably remember them promoting what were called Singapore cane matches, where the loser had to receive 10 blows from a rattan cane. And
Wow.
so, although the name, like rattan cane, might not be commonly recognized where you and I live, like the name of it itself, I'm sure most people would recognize it, from these various pop culture references, which have seeped in through current events or through history.
Yeah, as the saying goes, The Simpsons did it, right?
Right. No kidding. But so let's talk about our guest for this episode, Greg. Who's our guest?
Right. So our guest on this episode is Derek Riel. Derek was suggested to us as a possible guest by Todd Kowalski when we were talking sort of off air during the Dark Matters episode recording, because Derek's involvement with Propaganda goes way back. Derek was in the Winnipeg band Corpus Vile. He promoted shows in Winnipeg for a long time. He roadied for Propaganda for many years, from the early 90s to the early 2000s. And he's been close friends with the band for a long time. Listeners out there might recognize the name Derek Riel from a photo on the CD booklet of Where Quantity is Job One. And so, oh, Keith, I'll actually show it to you. I have it right here. So here's Derek
Right.
in this picture. And so if anybody out there has the Where Quantity is Job One compilation, open up to the inside cover and you'll see Todd in an American flag bikini. And next to him, you will see a picture of Derek Riel and his brother, basically what looks like fighting when they were in California on the road. And we talk about the story behind this photo in the interview. But also, Derek has a really powerful and historically important last name, Riel, which he shares with Louis Riel, who is a political leader of the Métis people of Canada and one of the founders of the province of Manitoba. Derek also appears often inside Sheldon Burney's Winnipeg oral history of the music scene called Missing Like Teeth, the book that Sheldon and I talked about on our Dear Coach's Corner episode. So Derek appears often in that book. So if you haven't read that yet, remember that ebook of Sheldon's book out there are about $5, and it's a great book about if you're interested in the Winnipeg underground music scene. And you can also read more about Derek from his days in the Winnipeg metal scene with Corpus Vile in that book. So I'm really excited to have Derek's involvement in this episode because he's got some great stories. I was excited that he selected Rattan Cane as his episode because it's his favorite Todd song. So without further delay, please enjoy my conversation with Derek Riel from Corpus Vile. Your spiritual cleansing is your impulse to the flock. Consider this your conversion, your final warning. Recite these words as we clean you of your filth. Are you to fight God? What are you trying to prove? Spare your family the shame and yourself the stain of a rest. Derek Riel, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Well, thanks for having me.
I'm so delighted to have you here, Derek. Can you just go ahead and spend a moment and introduce yourself a little bit to the audience so they know who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm Derek Riel. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm a former punk rock concert promoter. I've been in some bands here in Winnipeg. And I guess more for the purposes of this podcast, I was the driver, merchandise guy, roadie, promoter for Propaganda during their formative years from 1989 to like 2000.
Oh my God. That's such a long time. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, okay. So,
okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I actually met Chris and Jord before that, but when I was in my band, but yeah, I've known those guys for a long time.
Nice. Tell me about so let's go back to your band a little bit. I'm reading Sheldon Burney's Missing Like Teeth book right now about the Winnipeg music scene, and the name Corpus Vile pops up a little bit. Tell me about a little bit about some of your past performances.
I was in the band Corpus Vile. I guess you could sort of describe it as that crossover type feel that was sort of popular around those times. We put out a record on Fringe Records out of Toronto. They were like a Canadian label. That was 1989. The record came out. I think we recorded in 88. We did a couple of small tours out east and did a few shows locally, but yeah, the band sort of imploded. But yeah, Corpus Vile, What Does It Take? Check it out on YouTube.
Nice. Very good. When did you first come across Chris and Jordan and what they were doing? What's your earliest memory of meeting those guys?
Actually, around the time Corpus Vile was sort of breaking up, it was just me and the guitar player, Todd. And somehow he got a hold of Chris. I don't know if it was maybe through like Maxim Rock and Roll or some kind of ad, or I don't know what it was. But he had asked, he knew Chris and Jord, guitar player and drummer, and asked him to come out to our practice space and come jam with us. And that would have been about 89, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And they came out and jammed with us, and it was like really weird because I think they probably thought that we were auditioning for them, and they probably thought we thought they were auditioning for us. So nothing really came of that, but I did meet them at that time, and we hung out for a while. And then Chris actually came and recorded the demo for the new band that we started after that, a band called Blockbuster, worst name ever, but he recorded that demo, and yeah, that demo's still out there somewhere. I know Chris has a copy, and he won't give me a copy of it. I still want to hear that. I haven't heard it since we recorded it like in 1990.
Oh my gosh, I love those little time capsule cassettes. I have a few of those, like where my old bands would we'd be playing and like a friend of mine would plug a microphone into a front of a tape deck, and then they would just hold the microphone like up in the middle of a room, and we would just hit record and just play songs, and it would just be this massive ringing noise. You know what I mean? It's just those little moments in time though that are you can never redo that. It's so cool. So
yeah. I think I was just gonna say, I think Chris had a 4-track, so it was actually recorded onto like a 4-track.
Yeah.
The one thing I do remember about that is that he had this microphone with this little cord, and I was like singing, screaming, and he was like 3 inches away from my face. So it's like, and he says, "Yeah, I remember that time. I could like smell your breath." I was like, "Oh God."
Oh my gosh. Well, okay,
But
so
yeah.
how did the band sort of bring you into the fold as far as like doing some work for them throughout the years? Like how did that like relationship develop?
Well, in the early 90s, my brother Keith and myself started doing shows in Winnipeg. So we were bringing in bands from the States and across Canada, and Propaganda were playing a bunch of our shows. And from the time I was in Corpusville, I had a van, and it was set up like for with a bed in the back, and you put equipment in there. So 91, 92, I want to say that we actually got together, and Propaganda booked sort of a little tour down through the States and threw the equipment in my van, and away we went. So basically it was just like from owning a van and having like the means to go on tour and like, having shows and meeting them playing shows for us and stuff like that. So just the friendship sort of started out of that.
That's like pre Fat Records, pre How to Clean Everything. They went down into the States like before that ever even happened.
Oh yeah, that was I think their third demo was out, so it was just well, I don't geez. I don't even know if they had met Fat Mike, but I don't even think they had met Fat Mike or played that No Effects show in Winnipeg yet. And yeah, but we went down. It wasn't like the best of tours, like a lot of shows fell through and stuff, but it was it was a lot of fun. They played some good shows on that. The
Nice.
first one was the first one was in Rapid City with Jawbreaker, so that was pretty cool.
Man, awesome.
Yeah.
That's what a great gig to get to land on, especially in the middle of like the northern plains in the US with Jawbreaker in the middle and like Rapid City. That's really wild.
Yeah,
Holy
and I know
smokes.
going back to Rapid City a couple times, yeah, they had a good following there just because of that show, I think. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Great scene in Rapid City back in the day.
Well, Derek, I'm really curious about something here. So, about 10 years ago, I moved to Saskatchewan and I enrolled at the University of Saskatchewan as a graduate student. And the central building on campus is it shares your last name, Riel Place. And I wasn't like being from the US, I wasn't really familiar with what that name meant. So, like, you walk in and out of campus buildings all day long and you're like, oh yeah, I'm over in Riel, or oh yeah, I'm over at Louis or whatever. And because there's a pub on the middle of the University of Saskatchewan campus called Louis Pub, where I've actually seen Propaganda play with the Rebel Spell. But I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about your last name, because you have like a historically significant last name for Manitoba and Saskatchewan, like that Plains region of Canada. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, my last name is Riel, or Riel. I'm I guess Louis Riel would be my great great uncle. My grandfather's grandfather was Louis Riel's youngest brother. And I guess that's as close a relation as you can get, because unfortunately Louis Riel, both his children died young and never had any children of their own. But Louis Riel was basically the first premier of Manitoba. He brought Manitoba into a confederation. I guess the Canadian government, when they were going west, wanted to come in Manitoba and just impose all their own legislation and rules. But he formed a provisional government and managed to secure a bunch of rights and whatnot for the Métis people of Manitoba. And I guess Métis would be the mix of Indigenous and French Canadian mostly peoples. And I guess it didn't really, and he was actually a member of the House of Commons, but never actually got to sit, because before the provisional government actually became the official government, the Canadian government moved in and sort of steamrolled them out of the area, and there was a resistance. Then we're talking 1869, so he had to exile to the U.S. And then he came back into Saskatchewan when Saskatchewan was coming into Confederation. They asked him to come back and help lead a resistance against the government when Saskatchewan was coming into Confederation. And again, sort of got steamrolled by the government and unfortunately was executed as for treason. But as history's gone on, people began to realize that, well, he actually brought Manitoba into Confederation, and I guess the history sort of changed. Whereas when you were younger, you sort of thought, well, he was, a traitor. But as history's gone on, fortunately, some of it's been righted, and he's being recognized as like the first premier, the father of Confederation. And it's a very, I guess, it's a pretty popular name here in Manitoba. Like there's lots of things named after Riel, and it's a very well-known name.
Do you get asked about your last name a lot up there, or is that kind of like everybody's kind of like figured it out by now?
All the time.
All the time.
So like, what if you're like, yeah, if you go in like, what's the last name? Riel. Oh, are you related to Louis?
Yeah, man. Because like,
fine. Whatever.
What's so interesting is like something that really stands out to me is like the importance of place when it comes to a band like Propaganda, right? Winnipeg is like such a central part of the story, and so outside of Canada, there are tons of listeners for this podcast, and like Brazil and Australia and like the UK and France and all over the southern US. And that's a name that is like so essential to like central Canada, but is just very, very unknown as far as like I grew up in Missouri and I never learned about who Louis Riel was at all. And it's just south of you in the US. But awesome. Well, I'm really glad you were willing to share that. That's just such a fantastic little side note there. I was talking to Todd, and he mentioned that you are like one of the most important people that we could ask to be on this show. And I want to go back to our story where we kind of left off in 92. And tell me about your journey with the band from there, because then they get signed on to Fat Records, and then you're still involved with the band. So things must have kind of like taken on a brand new trajectory from there. And I'm wondering if you can continue that story about what your involvement was with the band, like post 92, going into 93 and the punk explosion, and then past that up to 2000.
Yeah, just like after that, we just continued doing shows, and they were still doing a lot of our shows, and then just continuing to tour with them. Like when they went on tour after How to Clean Everything came out, it was still a struggle to get shows. I remember then, but basically just continuing to tour with them. And I guess, and then shortly after that, I guess it was around 96, 97, we started G7 Records. And so we did that with them as well. But yeah, no, they were just awesome enough to let me come on tour with them. Went to Australia with them, went to Europe with them, a few tours across Canada and the US. So lots of fun.
Nice. Well, what did you do at G7? Were you actually an office employee there?
Well, I guess we wouldn't use the term employee, because I guess we're all supposed to be like equal members, but yeah,
sure.
Basically just helping run the label. We all had our different roles to do.
Nice. I'm curious about what some of the big, like if there are any like standout tours that were like your favorite tour to go on with the band.
One of my favorite tours still was that first one, even though like a lot of shows fell through, but nobody really knew who they were. That was just so much fun. It was just because it's the first time being on the road and that sort of thing. I know I had toured with Corpus Wild, but they were like really short tours, and we all hated each other, so it wasn't a lot of fun. But yeah, coming back with Propaganda, like we all just got along so much, and it was so much fun. But definitely going to Europe, that was awesome. That was like such an experience. So grateful for them for taking me on that one. That was just like so much fun. And anytime touring in Canada, I always love the shows in Canada so much. Going out to Quebec and stuff. Quebec is just like such a fun place to see shows, and I guess for them to play as well. Like they've always had such a big following out there. The kids out there are just so appreciative, just so into the music. Quebec is awesome.
Nice. Well, what's really hilarious is that I have something here. Here is a photo of you on the inside of the Where Quantity is Job Number One CD booklet. And it looks like you are having a fist fight. It says, Derek Riel struggling on the streets of Oakland with his brother Harley. And I'm wondering, And I'm wondering if you have the more of a context for the story of this particular photograph right here, where it looks like you're
Well,
involved
that
in
would have been.
a physical altercation.
No, I think we were just kidding around. That was actually would have been from the first tour because my brother came with us on that tour. So yeah, we were probably just horsing around in Oakland. Nothing serious. I don't think we were actually having a fist fight.
I love it. I
Not to
love
say
it.
that me and my brother haven't had fist fights in the past, but I don't think that was one of the. We were probably just goofing around. And that's Keith, by the way. His name's not Harley.
I love it.
I guess he kind of looks a little bit like Harley Flanagan. I don't know.
Did you two both go on the tours together? Was it like you two, Keith and Derek, and then the band? Like, were you both roadieing for Propagandy?
No, that was pretty much the only tour Keith came on. That was like the first one. So he just came along for, I guess, for the experience. That's all it was. Then after that, no, it was usually me or maybe one other person would come with us. I know, I think John Sutton came with us for one tour. Usually it was just me though. Oh, and then when we went out to Quebec, there was that guy from San Francisco. He had really smelly feet. He came with us out east to Quebec, but usually it was just the four of us.
Nice.
And then when we went to Europe and we went to Australia, we'd have a driver with us as well.
Nice.
Props to Stern out there in Germany.
Yeah, nice. I think that Stern's name came up a couple of times on my possible guest list as well. So I think I'm trying to track down some of these same people that you're talking about here. Good times.
Oh,
well,
yeah, Stern's a great guy.
Okay. So something I'm also curious about is like, so you have known about Propagandy for almost their entire existence, and you sent me some photographs of a demo cassette that are, I mean, essentially like total artifacts at this point. And I'm curious if you have like any stories of like actual like, old things that you've kept from over the years, like cassettes or flyers or posters or vinyl or anything that you kind of like hold dear as, these moments in time.
That's one thing I've always been terrible at is like creating memorabilia or keeping memorabilia from my past. Like I think back to the time I was like promoting all these bands and like we never took like one picture with any of these bands that were like came through, and like it seems like more strange now that everybody's got like the cell phones. You take a million pictures of everything. But back, yeah, like all these bands we did shows with, and we don't have like one picture with any of them. And I have like lots of photos and stuff like from when I went on tour with Propagandy, not tons, but apart from that, not really. Like some old tour t-shirts, and I found this demo that I didn't even know I had, and I was like, what the, wow. And I actually ordered that from Chris off of an ad. I think might even have been like a pen pal type ad in Maxim Rock and Roll. So sent him $3 and he sent me the demo.
What is the demo? Can you just describe what it is for the listeners?
It's the we don't get paid, we don't get laid, and boy are we lazy demo.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. And it's like actually Propagandy. I haven't listened to it in so long, but it is Propagandy, like total crossover. But it's not like a crossover sound because they did like pop punk songs like Pigs Will Pay, White, Proud, and Stupid. But then they had like thrash metal songs on here too, like Change and stuff like that. It was just like pure thrash metal. So it was like a combination of these two styles that would later, I guess, become more blended in their sound. But yeah, you could definitely hear like, and these are like good songs. Like these are still good songs.
Oh yeah. I mean, our most recent episode is Pigs Will Pay. Like that's the newest episode that we just did.
Well, there you go. Awesome. Yeah, and that's on here. And like White, Proud, and Stupid.
Yeah, great song.
Good stuff.
So
I wish I had a cassette player so I could listen to it.
Who's the bassist on that demo? Because that wouldn't have been John yet, right?
Well, yeah, I think at this time they have a picture of Scott Hopper inside here.
Okay.
But I don't think he actually played on it. I think Chris might have actually played the bass on this because I don't think Scott was in the band. I don't even know if they ever actually did a show with Scott, but he was in the band for a while. But yeah, this is before even Stinky Mike or way before Samson. Yeah.
Nice. Were you ever friends with Scott or Mike, the previous bass players before John?
Scott, yeah, well, it's Scott I knew around from the scene, so yeah, I'm gonna say we hung out a lot, but I definitely know Scott, really good guy. But Stinky Mike, yeah, just from shows, like doing the shows and stuff, but not a lot of memories of him, that's for sure.
Nice.
he was he
Well,
was he wasn't in the band for that long.
so I'm wondering about the transition of Todd coming into the band and your memories of that, because Todd was the one who told me to reach out to you. So I get the impression that you and Todd are buddies, and he really was excited whenever I slipped him a message and told him that you were coming on the show. So tell me about some of the transition years of Todd coming into the band when you were still working with them. What do you remember about those years?
Um, well, yeah, when Todd came into the band, we did the first tour ever out east, and the first show we ever played with him was in Thunder Bay. And I remember it was a bit of a disaster. I guess he was just so amped up and so excited, and he like didn't really play the best show in his life. And oh my God, he like stewed all the way from Thunder Bay to Sault Ste. Marie, but then he kicked it into gear. And then once they started playing a bit more live, and especially when they play, I think they played Montreal at the Spectrum, you began to realize that holy shit, this is a totally different band.
Mm.
Like this, like the sound is just sounds more fuller, like just such a presence too. Like, you know, Todd on stage is just like, yeah, unreal. Like just the energy and the vibe that he gives off. He like it's hard not to feel excited to watch them play when you see Todd up there just giving it his all the time.
Nice.
And he just brought, and just as far as like being able to attack the bass and like just bring that more heavy hardcore sound to Propaganda, and that's just not John's style at all, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Like John's a very different type of musician, and Todd just brought that ferocious attitude to the band that you could just feel it.
Was that tour Todd's first tour? Was that a tour with Pulley by chance in Eastern Canada?
They did do some shows, I think, with Pulley and in Quebec.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the whole tour with Pulley, but Pulley did play a couple of shows, I believe, out there. Yeah.
Okay. Because I talked to Scott Radinsky, the singer from Pulley, and he mentioned some mid 90s, like way back shows with Propaganda in Eastern Canada, about driving through some horrible weather and like playing like some community center or something like that.
That's right.
Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember we were driving. It was up in Quebec. It was one of the best shows. Like northern Quebec. I can't remember where it was, but it's like a hilly way to get there. You're going through the Canadian Shield. I remember Todd driving, and he's flying down the highway. It's snowy, it's icy, and we're flying downhill, and there's this semi in front of us. He's like, I can't stop. And he's like holding on to the wheel, and oh my goodness. It was a crazy drive to get there. And then I remember getting to this community center, like just in the middle of nowhere, and thinking like, where are we?
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, all these school buses show up and all these kids start flying out. And it was just like a wicked show.
Man.
It was so much fun. So much fun.
Yeah, that's exactly what Scott said. Scott from Pulley, he's like out there with Jordan and like Jim Cherry from Strung Out, and they're like, what is happening here? And then he remembers the buses arriving too, because like the buses went into the town, got the kids, and took the kids to the show. And I was like, this is the craziest story of a show I think I've ever heard. Like the way that they bust a bunch of kids from the town over to this community center.
Yeah. And those kids were so into it. And that's like more in northern Quebec, where like very few people actually speak English. It's very French, and kids are just awesome up there.
I love it. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the episode that you're on. So whenever I reach out to any guest, I always tell them that we're going to talk about you're going to be on a specific episode for a specific song. And I gave you the list, and one of the ones that you chose was the song Rattan Cane from Failed States. And I'm wondering if you can tell me why you picked this particular Todd song.
To me, it's like, it's definitely one of my favorite Todd songs, favorite Propaganda songs, favorite songs. Just such an intense and heavy song. It's just like lyrically and musically, it's just so insane. Like when you're talking about like this intro, this slow, heavy, plodding intro that you know is going to lead into something crazy, and then it just drops like almost like off time, like you don't expect it, And to me, it's maybe like riding a roller coaster or something like that, like where you're like going up, and you know you're going to drop, but it drops before you feel it, and then you just like hold it on. And you feel like it, almost like it just go off the rails at any single time, because it's just the riff is just so heavy, and then they got like the best drummer in hardcore, in my opinion, George, just like keeping everything together, but you just feel at any second this whole thing's going to fall apart, but it doesn't. And then it just sort of feels like it's going to fade at the end, and then it just comes back, Todd screaming in your face, and just, oh, so freaking heavy. God, I love that song.
Nice. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the transition between these records, right? So you were around like from the early days, like How to Clean Everything, Less Talk, More Rock have such a distinct sound. And then they go into Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, Supporting Cast, Potemkin City Limits, Failed States, where we have a series of really heavy records. And I know that you were a fan of metal and crossover from the days with Corpus Vile and everything. How did you feel about the transition of sounds across Propaganda records over the years?
Yeah, to me, this is like one of the reasons why I think personally in my mind, they're like one of the best bands in the world, without a doubt, is that they're able to take their sound and like just create so much new and awesome energy with every new release. Like there's nothing stale, there's nothing contrived about their sound. It's just so fresh and so perfect, like every single time. I know I'm like thankful because like every time they put out a new record, Todd invites me over to his house and I get to pre-listen to it. And sometimes I'm like almost afraid to go listen to it, because you're thinking, well, how can they do better than Failed States? How can they do better than Supporting Cast? And then here comes Victory Lap, and it's just like, holy shit, this is like blows you like right off your seat. It's like, how many bands can do that consistently, get better and better with every record, and still like just put out this powerful, crazy, perfect type of sound. I know it's just hard to put it into words, but yeah.
Tell me about your feel for the about your feeling for the Failed States LP in particular, because that's a really specific sounding Propaganda record. It's very dense, it's very dark. Tell me about your feeling of that record that Rattan Cane is on.
To me, yeah, it's definitely like the very much darker sound, heavier sound. I think Todd's songs on that record are like the best songs of that type of style he's written, like the heavier, thrashy type, in your face type sound. And then you compare that to what he, instead of like trying to reinvent that, he comes back with Victory Lap, and he's doing songs like Negredo and stuff like that, which are just like somewhat more hard technical. I don't know if I want to use the term technical, but just sort of like maybe not as thrashy and heavy, but just so deep and like amazing. That's what's so great about this band. But here they seem to be like in full straight ahead, in your face type style on this record. There's so many great songs on that record, but yeah, especially with Todd. I think Todd's songs on that record are definitely some of the best heavier thrash songs that he's ever written.
You mentioned a little bit about what you really like about the music already for Rattan Cane. Do you have any thoughts on like the specific lyrical content, or like any messages or interpretations that you get from the words?
Well, it's kind of neat that he sort of wrote it from the perspective of the person in charge, the person who would be wielding the Rattan Cane, like the oppressor sort of feel. I thought it was kind of cool how he wrote it from that style, from that point of view. And I think he sort of based it on, I saw a documentary on from Vice about the punk kids in Indonesia. I think it was Indonesia or Malaysia, where they were actually arrested all these kids at a punk show and took them to like an internment camp to condition them back to being subjects of the government, like falling into a certain style. So I thought, yeah, that's a pretty heavy topic to write about, especially to write it from like that point of view. Like, yeah, really cool. And I think he actually mentions that in the liner notes. He dedicates it to the punks of Indonesia or Malaysia, one of the two.
I'm pretty sure it's Indonesia off the top of my head. Yeah.
And then also the emos in Iraq, which was like a group of like emo type kids, dressing kids in Iraq. And then obviously they were suppressed by the government. A lot of them were I think there was like a string of murders where these kids are being murdered by the state just for looking different. So it's a pretty crazy topic, pretty crazy things. Like you think about like punk kids or whatever here in North America, they like sort of get looked down on, like, oh, look at that kid with a mohawk or whatever. But to face that kind of abuse or that kind of it's hard to put into words, but yeah. And for these kids to still be punks and still do their bands, and in the face of knowing that they could go to these camps and be tortured or be killed, and they're still punks, they're still playing in these bands, that's pretty hardcore.
It's so brave.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's inspirational from like a human rights standpoint.
Absolutely.
Well, Derek, you're one of the oldest friends of this band. And, just as like a summative point to this conversation, I'm wondering if you can just kind of tell me a little bit about what this band means to you in the grand scheme of your life.
Well, first of all, it's like the friendships, especially with Todd. Like, he's the one that I've kept in most contact with over the years. Like just being on tour and promoting his band. And then like we were both in jiu-jitsu together for many, many years. Watched him get his black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So we did that for many years together. And yeah, he's the one that I'm most in contact with. Just like, yeah, great guy. And Chris and Jord, like just the nicest guys ever. Like people that always are like, oh, Chris Hanna, what's he really like? And it's just like people have almost like created like this mystique around him or whatever, but really he's just like this antisocial nerd who's like, would rather just be sitting in his basement playing his guitar and listening to records and having to be this public person. But I give him credit because since he is this public person, he's like, well, I'm going to use this platform to do good. And that's one thing I've always respected for these guys, is that they've, no matter what kind of adversity they face from people, especially like in the early days, like so many people, oh, you rich kids from the suburbs, like who are you to tell us about, all these social issues or whatever. And, they never really back down on their beliefs. And, that's just so awesome.
Yeah, there's a Gilman Street show from 1995 where Chris was very, very saucy from the stage with the audience. And, how did that feel like back in the day, like it being on the road and like seeing Chris being such an outspoken and brave person from the stage, calling out so many things about, trying to make the world a better place. I know he has very mixed feelings about his behavior, like from the stage back in those days, but like that must have like been so interesting for you as their friend to watch this really quiet person become this totally different person on stage. Is that, do I have that right?
I would agree with that. Yeah. Like totally. I got to admit, sometimes I'd be sitting there behind the merch booth going, shut up and play Hannah already. But you had to respect it too. Like he was like, I'm going to get my point across and I don't care. And I think sometimes he liked to sort of like, stir the pot, agitate the crowd. He could feel the crowd, because there were certain nights he wouldn't be as vocal, but then certain nights, there'd be certain things. Like I remember one time in Australia, there was this kid, they had that shirt. I forget what it said, but it was anti-fascist, anti-homophobe or something on it. And the kid put a piece of tape over the anti-homophobe part or gay positive, I think that's what it said. And he put a piece of tape over that. So Chris saw that and then, oh yeah, it was time to start talking about these like gay rights issues and stuff like that. So he did pick his spots. Like I think he could sort of feed from the crowd, but yeah, there were a few times where it was like, come on, that's enough. You've been talking about this 30-second song for the last 15 minutes.
I love it. Well, Derek, it's just such a thrill to chat with you, to hear these stories, to get this like down on the record for the podcast listeners who are curious about what life was like about being on the road with this band back in the 90s and, being friends with them. And it's just awesome that you were willing to take some time with me today and hang out and chat about this amazing band that we all love so much.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I'm always up to talk about the old days. It's lots of fun.
Awesome. Welcome back. Thank you so much to Derek Riel for taking the time to come on the show and tell some stories. And thank you, as always, to Todd Kowalski for suggesting Derek as a possible guest and helping us get connected. So, alrighty, Keith, should we go ahead and dive into the music for Rattan Cane?
Yeah, Greg, think about the songs that come before Rattan Cane. I mean, you have like the monstrous climactic build in Note to Self. You
Mm-hmm.
have a barn burner like Failed States, then an unrelenting shredder, Devil's Creek, which I know you love.
Yep.
The beginning of the song, that ambient intro, feels like a reprieve from the intensity that has come in the first part of this album. There's like atmospheric soundscapes. It gives way to like that really heavy but slow power trio riff. Chris has some really gnarly bends, and then I think it's the beef. He comes in with like that wah sound as he's harmonizing with Chris. So it's heavy, but it's not really at the energy of the earlier parts of this album. So you think it's maybe a break, and then at a single pinpoint spot, the song morphs into a different beast altogether. And what I would say, honestly, is the heaviest song the band has ever written.
Wow. Okay. I want to examine that a little more. So we're going to talk a little bit about some guitar here. So I actually kind of agree with you here on this.
Hmm.
I think that maybe Night Letters has a slight competition in that heaviest realm as
Sure.
well. But obviously, this is up for debate, and this is totally like our subjective experiences here that we're discussing. So I can just hear people out there screaming, "No way!" New Homes for Idle Hands or March of the Crabs or Fuck the Border is heavier, but whatever. So when in need for guitar discussion lately for this show, I have just been obsessive for the last several months about watching Clem from Last Note
Oh,
on
he's the best.
YouTube.
Yeah.
And looking at my trusty Sheet Happens book, which is made by Tim, Luke, and Cam from Protest the Hero. If you're looking for some guitar breakdowns of this particular song, that tablature book from Sheet Happens for Failed States in particular is amazing because it has the lyrics printed inside the book over the notes. So you can really follow along in really particular time for people who are like me, who are not great musicians and really can't understand that. So this one's got some strange tuning. It's in drop
Mm,
C. So we got a
right.
C, A, D, G, B, E. And I don't know what it is about that guitar intro, man, but that guitar intro you were talking about is so cool. To me, it's the closest that Propaganda has ever come to doom metal. I was listening to some doom yesterday and I found a doom band called Lost who has a song called Cut Up, Depressed and Alone. And the riff in this intro sort of reminded me of that slow and
Yeah.
low doom feel. So I think this might be the doomiest Propaganda segment in this intro to this song. But man, when that first bass note hits in that guitar intro where it goes, "Boom," and
Right.
Todd just really hits that long, low ring on that intro note on the guitar underneath Chris. I just like, and the drums come in at the same time. That when that bass hits, it really just takes this thing into some kind of different stratospheric feel. And do you know what I mean about the doom thing? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, like I would say funeral doom, like the
Mm-hmm.
band lost it. So not like sleep or something kind of Sabbath worshipy, but
Right.
definitely something somber and very slow and very like atmospheric. I think that totally works.
Yeah, and something that is so awesome is how from when the vocals come in to the line that says, "Are you defying God?" I love that riff because if you watch
Mm,
playthrough videos, all they're doing is just hammering on that low string. It's only on one string. So the first whole part of the song, when the
hmm.
fast part comes in, they're just and just hitting on that low E. And it's really, really cool because it's tuned down to that drop C, but they're just hammering on one string for the vast majority of that riff. And it seems so simple to do a riff like that, but it seems somewhat rarely utilized by bands. But like if you remember that Todd wrote this song and that Todd plays bass in the band, I wonder if he wrote the song on guitar to feel like a bass riff.
Mm.
or if he originally wrote that riff on bass, possibly, or if he was trying to come up with a bass line while playing his guitar, and that this is just how it came out on guitar, because they really just hammer it on that low E. So I love how the bass riffs and the guitar riffs are so stylistically aligned on this song that it gives it the depth of an almost bottomless feeling low riff.
Mhm.
And this is a riff well that runs deep on just that one string. And I just thought that was so ridiculously cool.
Yeah, that stood out to me too, Greg, like that it wasn't power chords because it's so heavy and it has a very thick in full sound. Seeing in the tab book, but also seeing Clem play through and that it's just on, on just the low string and that tuning definitely has, I think, an impact here in how heavy and low it sounds. So like you mentioned that it's drops. My friend Adam kind of said that this tuning stood out to him and it caught his eye. It's a half step down with like the low E dropped as if it were in drop D, but then the low E is dropped another half step.
Yeah.
So it's even lower. He said that he hadn't seen tuning like that before and couldn't really figure out how or why someone would play tuned like that. And then Dark Matters, he pointed out, is tuned and performed in the same way. So that's really interesting that there's like these unorthodox tunings. One didn't notice, and a musician friend of mine was like, "Oh, that's really strange." And
Mm-hmm.
it definitely has an impact in making the song sound just a lot heavier. And then something else that I think really makes a song stand out in the band's catalog is the use of like that dissonant partial chord. Again, my friend Adam explained it. Like I texted him, I'm like, "Hey, what's that metalcore dun dun dun
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
how would you describe that? Like that every metalcore band was doing in the early 2000s. Um, yeah, exactly. So he explains like that the high note is a half step off the root note and it creates that like grating sound, atonal, sharp ringing sound. But rather than like really relying on that like tons of bands did, it's thrown in by Chris and Beeve at unexpected points
Mm-hmm.
throughout the song. Like at the very beginning of Todd's singing, they do that, right? When they go into that low riff that you were describing, and it
Yep.
comes back, of course, at that insane outro at the end. That grating partial chord there just creates this uneasy listen. And it makes like the music and the lyrics feel like they're directed at the listener, which I think is a complete intention, which we'll get into when we talk about the words.
Yeah, I really love the guitar going into those ringing strums under the vocal. You think you're one of a kind. And then like so they also have that ringing guitar for those
Right.
long just strums that just ring and hang in the air. But the bass is just giving it under that.
Right.
He's
Yeah.
going from that low E
Yeah.
to that high G. And so Todd is just going high, low, low, high, low, low on that E and G. And then he's
Mhm.
just doing this little run on the D as a sort of like little riffy shred in the middle of it. So it's just super cool how the guitars dial back from the franticness and then the bass kicks in and he's just going, and I just love that part too. And another part that stands out is after I look at you and I see nothing but a fool and that riff comes in
Right.
and it's so thick. And I looked up the tablature, and Todd, Chris, and Beav are all doing the exact same thing after that. I look at you, I see nothing but a fool. And they're just hitting that low string on the first fret and that ringing part. They just go, and that little lick is just 3 2 1 2 3 2 1 2. That's all it is on
Yeah, right.
that low string for that little rolling lick before going into and to help you understand. And there's some really awesome other guitar covers as well on YouTube that I watched. So there's obviously Clem Last Note. There's also the Norwegian Oslo, and then there's
Also great. Yeah.
yeah, and then the YouTube channel of Michael Torseth. So there's really, really
Mhm.
great and clear guitar performances out there for anybody who wants to practice a little bit of a rolling lick on their low E tuned down to drop C. It's a really cool little lick. Do any other thoughts on the music stand out on guitar or bass or anything like that to you?
Yeah, as you were imitating that rolling riff, if you had just shown me the tablature, I would have thought like, "Oh, this is like a new metal band."
Mm.
because it's like just like so simple, but the way it's played and the way it's tuned and then the music that it's set to, it would not be what would expect to hear if you actually put the record on. Greg, I just love Todd's vocals on this record as a whole. I mean, they're like super heavy here. They're emotive, but they're also very distinguishable. I mean, you barely need the lyric sheet when you're following along and listening, which I think really says something about delivery when you can have a heavy vocal scream or a yell, but still be audible, right?
Yeah.
And still be distinguishable. The bass line, especially when Todd sings, I am patient and I am fair. There's that super great, like heavy part, but the dynamic higher bass runs. And there's just like a double dose of Todd intensity, the vocals and the bass. There's that monstrous scream at the end,
Oh,
like a
the
roar, I
best.
would say. And I remember being very like surprised by that the first time I heard it, to where I was like, wait, what was that? Holy
Yeah.
smokes. And I think that, coupled with everything else, like the outro, really is what would make me say that this is like the heaviest song. Like Night Letters is definitely more technical. You know, there are Todd songs on Today's Empires that are faster and more abrasive, but for me, like this one is the most metal. Maybe I'll say that rather than heavy. This is like the most metal of Todd songs. And I saw Converge come up a lot on YouTube comments. And at first I was like, I don't know about that. And then the more I listened to this to prepare for the episode, I was like, that outro kind of does sound like, like 2000s really abrasive metalcore, but it's played so fast
Yeah.
that you wouldn't really hear from a lot of bands unless it was a far more technically crafted and gifted band like Converge.
Yeah.
So I think that focus on the backbeat, there's that dissonant metalcore riff. It's just really stands out in,
Yeah.
in their discography.
I tell you what, man, if Converge played a lot like their Dark Horse style from Axe to Fall, like that opening on that Axe to Fall record, I
Oh
feel
yeah.
like this is a sort of stylistically similar approach to that band, because that's
Hmm.
one of Converge's most straightforward songs, but it's also one of my favorite songs by them, because you have the dueling vocals of Jake and Nate on
Hmm.
that, but you also have that super straightforward, like almost punk rock beat that
Hmm.
Propaganda is utilizing here. But man, I was thinking about that scream too.
It's so
And
good.
dude,
It's so
it's
good.
like it might be the best Todd vocal moment ever.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's truly special. And like, I just keep picturing my conversation with JP Peters whenever he was on for Negretto, and how he picked a Todd song to talk about.
Mhm.
And I'm like, man, I wonder if JP watched Todd do that, or if like they had their backs to each other so that like Todd could just like unleash. I'm like, did JP watch this happen when Todd just went, oh,
And I wonder how many takes it took. Tom Araya famously said with the scream at the beginning of Angel of Death, it took like 4 or 5 times. And Thomas Lindbergh from At the Gates was like, there's no way, because the go that screamed at the beginning of Slaughter of the Soul, it
go,
took, yeah, it took, he said it was like 40 or 50 takes just for a go.
go.
Right. So I think about that every time I hear it. Like, I really wonder how many times did Todd have to do this?
It might be his best moment of all time. I'm not even joking. Like, it's
Yeah.
ridiculous how amazing that is, especially when you like turn up the remaster remix version on vinyl and you just freaking
Mm-hmm.
crank it in a living room in a small house. It is just overwhelming how the sounds that come out of people's faces sometimes just blow my mind. Like whenever people are like, I'm talking to people about music and like Mike Patton will come up, I'm like, can you believe the sounds that come out of that dude's face?
Yeah.
That sound came out of somebody's freaking face. And like, this is one of those moments where you're like, I can't believe that came out of a human being. This is incredible. But man, we got to talk about this outro real quick musically. This song has maybe my favorite outro in all of
Mm.
Propaganda's recorded discography. I mean, to me, this outro is like basically up there with Purina Hall of Fame as far as outros go, because it's just so unbelievably good. It's like they're dabbling with Todd's grindcore past almost,
Yeah.
with like swallowing shit, like
Mm-hmm.
incorporating some blast beats, and that howling scream into the outro is just amazing, as we've talked about. But I talk about some of my favorite moments of recorded Propaganda. Like that's sort of like something that I started latching onto. Like this is like whenever I talked about the yes in
Yeah, right,
supporting cast.
right,
I'm like,
right.
moment. And then I was like, oh, our show is called Unscripted Moments. And I'm like, wow, what if I start talking about my favorite moments in propaganda? Partially for the name of the show, but partially because of the little things this band does that stand out in their catalog to me and
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
them
yeah.
such a special band. And this tune's blast beat outro kind of reminds me of the verses in Night Letters. So I almost see this like this outro is like a few stylistic experimentations of Todd connecting across supporting cast and failed states. And it's almost like a companion piece to the blast portions of Night Letters. And the guitars on the outro are quintessential riffy propaganda too, because of the high, low, low guitar and bass over George's blast beat approach. And Sue Lin talked a lot about the high, low, low way back on Tertium Non Datur. So you can go back and listen to that if you want to hear about the band's approach to that riff style that they do so well. But the bass lines here and the guitar lines for Chris, Todd, and Beeve, it's just absolutely wonderful. And that
Mhm.
scream, crazy. Any other thoughts on the music here, buddy?
I'm ready to dive into the lyrics and how the words and ideas match the music here. Yeah.
All right. Well, in preparation for this episode, I found a shockingly huge amount of resources from sources ranging from Human Rights Watch to Alternative Press to Common Dreams to the BBC to the Christian Science Monitor to the Washington Post. The trove of sources that stem out from a propaganda song in the last year, I can't even count how many things that you and I have found based on the topics that this band addresses. This never ceases to amaze me, the rabbit hole of sources that you find when you begin looking at a song that has 100 words in it. And I know I've said it so many times, but when there's so much information out there on the topics of these songs. But this is a song, as we mentioned in the outro, in the intro, about punk and the emo, about the punk scene in Indonesia and the quote unquote emos, which isn't really associated with music at all in Iraq. But something that stands out to me about this song, in particular with failed states, is that it seems to tie in Islam, the religion, a little bit. So here we have Indonesia, the world's most populated Muslim majority country, where 12.7% of the world's Muslim population lives, and Iraq, where 2% of the world's Muslim population lives. But on this record, we have Rattan Cane taking place in these two Muslim majority nations. But we also have the lyrics earlier in the record about on Note to Self, which discusses the no-fly list, seemingly in relation to terrorism
Mhm.
and the post 9/11 society in which we all live, which we'll talk about when we do that episode actually pretty soon, which I'm excited about that episode. But there's also the lyrical connection there to me between Note to Self and Rattan Cane a little bit because of the allusions to Muslim majority countries and issues with the post 9/11 society that we live in. And I absolutely love this little thread in here because to me, it asks all of us listening to consider religious diversity a little more carefully in our lives. And it also makes me think about people in the world who like punk or metal or indie rock or country or whatever, and how people of all religious beliefs and backgrounds enjoy music and enjoy culture and enjoy, parties and friendships and social life. I'm currently also reading a book by a man named Michael Muhammad Knight. The book is called Taqwa Cores, about a group of Muslim punk rockers living in Buffalo, New York. And it's an awesome book because it has so much specifically religious information and also shows the gray areas in between the black and white of how we go through life while exploring the boundaries and edges of what is considered acceptable in certain lifestyles and
Yeah.
societies
Mhm.
where there are certain behavioral and ethical norms that people are expected to fit within based on the belief systems and the structures of societies where certain religions dominate. And everybody in this country knows, in the US particularly, what that pervasive norm of religion is in this country's history as well. So this, you know, transcends borders, it transcends specific religions. There are behavioral and ethical norms that get imposed upon us based on the countries in which we were born, totally by chance. But it doesn't reduce that human want to connect to culture and things like music and friendships and pushing the boundaries here and there a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, if you want to read an interesting exploration of being Muslim and being into punk rock, hardcore, straight edge, drugs, drinking, or whatever, check out that book Taco Core, because it's pretty cool. So that are some of the intro thoughts that I had and some of the thought processes I had leading into this conversation. So let's start with Iraq here a little bit. In 2012, a series of killings began occurring in Iraq, targeting so-called emos, who were folks with skinny jeans, spiky alternative haircuts, and were perceived to be on the LGBTQ sexual orientation variety of identities and sexual orientations. I found a quote from Serena Tolino, who is a scholar who studies LGBTQ issues specifically in the Middle East. And Tolino reported that, quote, conservative forces in the region argue that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities and lifestyles are expressions of Satanism,
Mhm.
contradict Islamic precepts and human nature, and are the result of corrupting foreign influences. I found some stories here. One story from Human Rights Watch cites official interior ministry documents in Iraq around these issues that talk about the lack of protections facing youth, seen as part of the emo subculture. And the interior ministry documents cites the emo scene as Satanist, and at one point, the Interior Ministry of Iraq had it posted on their website that they were tracking the devil worshiping emo phenomenon and working to eliminate it, which basically means anyone, like I said, wearing black t-shirts and skinny jeans or whatever. And a portion of the Interior Ministry's statement read, quote, the emo phenomenon or devil worshiping is being followed by the moral police, who have the approval to eliminate the phenomenon as soon as possible, since it's detrimentally affecting the society and becoming a danger. And then it went on to say they wear strange, tight clothes that have pictures on them, such as skulls, and use stationery that are shaped as skulls. They also wear rings on their noses and tongues and do other strange activities. And I got that information from an article in The Atlantic by Seth Abramovich titled, Is Iraq Killing Hundreds of Emo Teens?
That same statement from the Interior Ministry said that this emo phenomenon was spreading through schools, and it especially laid blame on teenage girls. So, as we talk about this, I recommend that our listeners pay attention to the influence of patriarchal and heteronormative and traditional gender roles and norms in power structures, in specifically in Aceh, but also in Iraq.
Yep, yep. And in Baghdad, around this time period when the emo phenomenon was on the increase, there were signs and flyers that appeared in the Baghdad neighborhoods of Sadr City, El Habibiyah, and Hay al Amal that threatened people by name with, quote, the wrath of God unless they cropped their hair short, gave
Mm.
up wearing so called satanic clothing, and style critics that were associating things with emo and metal music and rap. And they were saying to, you better hide your tattoos if you have them. And you have to also, quote, maintain complete manhood. There were reports on a wall in Sadr City that read, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, we warn every male and female in the strongest terms to stop their dirty deeds in 4 days before the wrath of God strikes them through the hands of mujahideen. This poster that was hanging up around the neighborhoods also listed 33 names of people and was decorated with images of handguns. So people seen as gay, lesbian, trans, and effeminate men were particularly vulnerable in these situations. But like, can you imagine like having your name show up on a poster hanging up in the neighborhood in which you grew up in because you're wearing a certain kind of jeans? I mean, wow.
I read about journalists from Reuters who found similar leaflets posted throughout East Baghdad. And like the names of the young people, right? We're talking about young people. They're being threatened with murder because they're suspected of being either gay or emo. An article from Al Jazeera referred to these tracks as night letters,
Whoa.
referencing the Taliban's practice in Afghanistan of disseminating threatening notes on mosques and schools and government buildings at night so that they could remain unseen. And I hadn't really made a connection between Rattan Cane and the song Night Letters itself until I came across that. But I think there's really like a clear connecting thread between these two songs.
Yeah. And, there are reports of possibly several dozen deaths and disappearances of these kids from these neighborhoods in Baghdad. And there's a quote that I found from Human Rights Watch that says a 26-year-old man from Mosul told the rights group that unknown assailants killed two members of his heavy metal band on March 8th because of their appearance. He said, quote, "We don't know who is behind this now, but for a long time, people have been accusing us of being Satanists. So this is not new, but now it has become murderous." A Shia cleric in the region was also quoted as calling emos, quote, "crazy fools" and, quote, "a lesion on the Muslim community." And that was from Human Rights Watch about an investigation into the emo attacks.
And what I found to be heartbreaking is that when you would see condemnations from religious leaders in Baghdad or elsewhere, a lot of times they were modified with statements like, they are referring to the suspected emos. They are a plague on Muslim society, and those responsible should eliminate them through legal means. So
Yeah.
even if there is this condemnation of the killing, there is still, of course, not an acceptance of people who differ from whatever the norm in dress and appearance and gender expression, whatever that might be.
Yeah, dude, there is so much information out there
Yeah.
about this. Like, this is an immense amount of resources that we were culling to prepare for this episode. I found an article quote from an NGO who works on Iraqi issues who put the number of deaths by stoning for the emos at between 90 and 100 deaths. So the way it's done is the education ministry works with the moral police who visit schools and tell students how to dress in front of the classroom. The police said they're just trying to guide the kids, but the kids who were interviewed on camera during the time when this was being reported knew they were being threatened in a veiled manner. And you can read articles about that at alarabia.net, which is the news article where I found about the kids being quoted.
And Al Jazeera describes the stoning as death by blocking, which is smashing cinder blocks onto each side of a person's head. And that was allegedly used to kill many of the Iraqi emos.
Ugh, it's so gross. And, I found another report from The Guardian reporting that girls with tattoos were also vulnerable and that the killer's main form of killing, I also found, was the concrete block to the head for the tattooed girls as well. The report also wrote about the 2009 police campaign against the LGBTQ people in Iraq, and the
Mhm.
2012 attacks on emos was seen as synonymous with gay by a lot of people as well. So this is something that was being seen as being on the increase in 2009.
Yeah.
And by 2012, they had reframed it away from being explicitly about gay people to being about quote unquote emos. But the two are believed to be pretty connected. And so much of this has to do with sexuality or perceived sexuality. And, I found a Vice interview with a gay Iraqi expat living in the UK named Ali Hilly from 2012. And he was interviewed about pre and post invasion Iraq. So the timeline here of events that we're talking about is post US invasion, post
Mhm.
2003, post Saddam Hussein, post Ba'athist regime. Okay. And the interviewer asked Hilly, what was it like being a gay male in Iraq? And Hilly replied, quote, "To tell you the truth, prior to the invasion, it was really good. I wasn't in favor of the previous dictator, and I was so against him and his policies in general. Having said that, life in general for sexual minorities was quite relaxed. We used to have nightclubs and areas where people could come and go and do whatever they wanted. Nobody ever bothered them. There was a cruising area in central Baghdad that was protected by patrolling police cars, which is something people can't believe when I tell them now." The interviewer then asked, quote, "When did the LGBT nightclubs close and the protection for the community disappear?" And Hilly replied, and this is really important out there for people in the US, Canada, UK, etc., to hear. This is important to me, right? So Hilly replied, quote, "When the US and the UK invaded Iraq, that ended the secular state of Iraq and turned it into a very dark age. fanatical religious period for Iraq. They brought us a Shiite government whose ideology is imported from Iran. They adopted their lifestyle strategy and cultural habits, and they tried to impose this on Iraq's society. So the invasion of Iraq, everyone, what more can be said about that? You know, it's another unforeseen consequence that I'm sure was considered deeply by those making serious foreign policy and military decisions at the highest levels of the US government in 2003. Why wouldn't Don Rumsfeld and Dick
Mm.
Cheney and George Bush be thinking about the gay nightclub scene in Baghdad? You know what I mean?
For more information on these communities before and after the invasion and the regime change, I really strongly recommend the article Gays, Crossdressers, and Emos Non Normative Masculinities in Militarized Iraq from the Journal of Middle East Women's Studies. You can find it online, a PDF, and read for free. And the author concludes that despite Saddam Hussein's homophobic outbursts, there is no evidence of organized violence against supposed gays or crossdressers by the Ba'athist government or allied non state actors before 2003. And recent waves of violence against gender and sexual queerness in Iraq target the country's cultural heritage and are part of continuous attacks on Iraqi civil society, whose gender and sexual diversity is often unaccounted for in conventional narratives. So there's like this, always you hear this idea of like a clash of cultures. And the author here concludes it's not a clash of culture, that existed beforehand, but with the invasion and with the importation of like these new beliefs and the ability of theocratic government to alter the society that existed before, that is at the heart of this change over time.
And I'm really glad that you found that article at the 11th hour last night. So I was like reading that before I was like going to sleep last night. And I was like, oh my God, this is the best article I've read on this yet. And so we will definitely post that article on our Twitter handle in the coming days after this episode is released. A noted outburst. So Saddam Hussein was a total homophobic, like
Right.
just horrible person, right? And one of those noted outbursts from Hussein was documented in a 1991 Ba'athist Party document where he said, quote, "The rabble rousers do not know these notions of tribal loyalty to the dictator. Those who dye their hair in green and red do not know these meanings, and it is a shame for you to let them live. You should slaughter them with your own hands. Those people who dye their hair and wear red lipstick like women, I say you must slaughter them and hold me responsible for it. Whoever dyes his hair and wears makeup like women is effeminate." And what was really interesting to me after reading that is that a lot of the tribal leaders that Hussein said that to pushed back on
Yeah.
Hussein. I
Right.
found that to be so
Hmm.
fascinating that a lot of the sheikhs that Hussein was saying these homophobic tirades to were pushing back on him, saying, "This is ridiculous. This is a waste of our time." And were, challenging him in that regard. So that
Saying there
article,
was like greater problems that the country
yes,
needed to address.
yes, yes. And like I'll get into this later, but like that's what societies that are weak do is they mirror their problems and their inability to improve with the current leadership by blaming the most
Hmm.
vulnerable in society for how crappy things are. Oh, our society sucks. It's definitely that guy with dyed green hair's fault.
Hmm.
Completely that one person's fault, right? And that article is so interesting. It also talks about fatwas, which people might know from like the fatwa that was put on like the author Salman Rushdie for his book Satanic Verses, of which I have a signed first edition, by the way, and so much pre and post invasion information that it would be a good idea for listeners to read that article themselves. So I really like that too.
The professor adds further to that, despite armed and well financed attempts to repress diversity, Iraqi society remains multiple and vital in its gendered and sexual practices. In many communities, social spaces, and subcultures with different value systems exist and are not completely isolated from one another. While there is not necessarily widespread endorsement of such diversity, the vivid public debate and broad condemnation of the killings of emo youth in 2012 is an encouraging sign that sexual and gender diversity will continue to be embraced in Iraqi society. So there's like this positive conclusion that I was also in a way not expecting to read at the end of this.
Yeah, and one of my favorite quotes in that article was, although the mass recruitment of men as soldiers and fighters often temporarily expanded spaces for women's participation in the Iraqi public sphere, militarism and militarist discourse before and since 2003 have reinforced gender polarity and heroic forms of masculinity, marginalizing and degrading the non-combat social positionalities of the majority of men and women.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, organized violence against queer positionalities or men perceived to violate sexual and gender norms occurred only after 2003. And the essay explores the ruptures and continuities in organized violence against sex or gender nonconformity in recent Iraqi history. And that blew me away because honestly, because it challenged my own preconception of what pre-invasion Iraq would have been like. Blew my
Mhm.
mind that 2.5 million people live in Sadr City, the site of a lot of the stuff described in the tune. And it also is important to note that the author wrote there is little research about the Iraqi Ba'athist regime's handling of non normative sexualities and masculinities. So just because it isn't highly documented that these acts of violence occurred, there isn't any evidence that much violence did occur pre invasion against sexual nonconformity. It doesn't mean it didn't happen,
Yeah.
but it also means that it got way worse and way easier to document post invasion.
And the author also addresses like the tendency for people to kind of look back and with things being so terrible following the U.S. invasion, that seeing the prior times and like the grass is greener and more nostalgia. So he's also willing to address it. It's definitely I think honest in its addressing of the this idea over two distinct eras. And what I think is also important, Greg, is adding to what you said about perceived sexuality
Yeah.
or gender expression. There's a quote from Mark Levine, a history professor at UC Irvine, that really hit me. He said, in a conservative society, few behaviors or identities are more threatening to the keepers of public morality than perceived homosexuality, especially in a culture in which men and women spend so much time segregated by gender. The need to police the boundaries between homosocial and homosexual becomes a central focus of government and social action in order to preserve the social order. Yet the attacks on suspected homosexuals has much less to do with their sexual orientation than it does with power and control. Indeed, in more than half a dozen years of attacks on suspected gays in Iraq, attackers have raped the gay men they attacked for being gay. So it becomes so easy to target the vulnerable when the powerful set their sights and an idea, if it's emo or gender expression or sexual identity, because they get to define and then redefine that standard as a way to almost always be at war with people. And I think it's so important that you made that connection, Greg. I mean, just think about how moral panics
Yes.
spread through calm, peaceful towns in the Midwest or in the prairies. So now just recast that in a country that has been devastated by invasions and sectarian violence for literally decades,
Yeah.
where gender roles have either been hardened along hypermasculine and militaristic lines due to mass recruitment, but also gender roles in a way have evolved due to the absence and the death of men that have allowed for women to have more of a participation in society, even if it's still limited or temporary. The death of 200,000 plus civilians, a nation where just years before, like we mentioned in 2009, there's already a history of death squads torturing and killing men who are considered not manly enough or being suspected of being gay. Just read "They Want Us Exterminated" from Human Rights Watch for more information on that. And you have a nation overrun by theocratic militants with Western pop culture seeking in. I mean, the place is just primed for scapegoats and for a moral panic.
Yeah, and there are so many articles that people out there can read about this particular wave of violence in Iraq. And, you can have a look at the sources. So, that article you mentioned earlier, Gays, Cross-Dressers, and Emos, Non-Normative Masculinities in Militarized Iraq, which appeared in the Journal of Middle East Women's Studies by Achim Rodi. You can also read Iraq After America, Strongmen, Sectarians, Resistance by Joel Rayburn. You can read the reporting in the BBC from Rami Ruhayem. You can read Seth Abramovich's Truth Check, Is Iraq Killing Hundreds of Emo Teens? So there are so many that you can find in alternative press, Common Dreams, Gay Day magazine, Morocco World News. I mean, it's all over the place if you search for these particular events. So moving on to our second location dedication, the song Aceh in Indonesia. So the events in question take place in the city of Banda Aceh, where a lot of this took place. And it's on the northernmost tip of the island of Sumatra in Indonesia. It's across the Malaccan Strait from Phuket, Thailand. Aceh is the province where Islam first arrived to Indonesia, which a lot of folks don't know this, but Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim country, not a Middle Eastern country,
Hmm.
Indonesia. In 2001, Aceh province authorized the enforcement of Sharia law. And in the 90s, punk also got really popular in Jakarta, directed at Suharto's regime. Remember
Hmm.
Suharto from our Mate Kamarisakun Rasakan episode? Same dude. So then the 2004 tsunami hit Aceh. Okay. So that's the exact place where punks dealt with this harassment and re-education experience. And 167,000 people died in Aceh. After the tsunami, there was this period of devastation and tragedy. And what happens when tragedy tends to strike, as Naomi Klein documented very clearly in her book Shock Doctrine, is that post tragedy, opportunists slide in there and reshape society post tragedy. Okay. So since the tsunami, Sharia grew in influence, and that's a huge part of this backstory.
So following that event, the Indian Ocean tsunami, the province gained semi-autonomy from the central government in Jakarta as a part of a peace deal negotiated to avert even further catastrophe in the form of armed conflict between separatist rebels there and the army of Indonesia.
A tragedy strikes, unsolvable problems emerge, corruption goes hog wild, and you could consider the dismantling here in the US of the New Orleans public school system after Katrina as an example in the US of like this vulture capitalist approach to
Mm,
reshaping society in the wake of a tragedy. But then authorities want to look powerful in the face of tragedy. So like they're in control of society. So they look for groups like Aceh punks to blame for social ills and degradation, who they then harass and punish as a way to look strong in the face of society, who are filled with scared people who are living in the wake of a tragedy. They look to blame people for social ills and degradation, which is simply smoke and mirrors distraction. So, oh, things are broken, let's blame Black Lives Matter. Oh, things are broken, let's blame Antifa or
mm.
punks in Aceh. Smoke and mirrors, deflect, retain power, stay corrupt, blame the easy targets. So in 2011, in December 2011, police raided a punk show in Aceh and detained 65 people, shaved off their mohawks, removed their piercings, burnt their clothing, and used Islamic values as the excuse for doing so. And after they were arrested, the punks spent 10 days getting rehabilitation, re education, getting military style discipline courses, and taking religious classes, including Quran recitations.
And the police chief stated, this is a direct quote, "First, their hair will be cut, then they will be tossed into a pool. That'll teach them a lesson. We'll change their disgusting clothes. We'll replace them with nice clothes. We'll give them toothbrushes, toothpaste, shampoo, sandals, and prayer gear. It will all be given to them." And it almost sounds like how Todd is writing the song, that first person perspective of the police, of
Yep.
the re-educator. It really connects there. And punk was labeled as the new social disease. What is important to note is that the concert that was raided was a charity event for children who were
God.
orphaned by the Indian Ocean tsunami. And one punk was able to get away because he had a helmet hiding like his either piercings and his mohawk. And he said about his friends, they were beaten up like animals. It broke my heart to see how my friends were beaten up like that. I could not do anything to help them because the officers were armed and they moved really fast. They pulled my friend's hair and they dragged them. Just think about like the concerts you've been with your friends.
Yeah.
Like, if you're in a mosh pit or if
Yeah.
you're stage diving, the clothes that you wear, and how like we don't have to worry about, if anything, it's maybe someone judging the band shirt that you have on, but you
Right.
don't have to worry about being rated at a venue. So even during this re-education that you described, Greg, the punks still remain defiant during the strict military marches and drills in the blistering heat. The detainees would reportedly yell, "Punk will never die." And one punk, Andre, screamed, "Punk's not dead," after being forced back onto a truck after a mandatory visit to a nearby mosque. So they remained defiant throughout it, which I think is super inspiring.
Yeah, and there examples like this do appear in the US as well, like in early 1980s Los Angeles, where
Oh, sure,
shows would
sure.
routinely be rated, but there was
Yeah.
never a dragging them off to church to reinstill Christian values into them. So afterwards, after this 10 days, these folks in Indonesia were sent home, but there's still a scene. And
Mm.
I was listening to some Indonesian grindcore the other day, which is pretty sweet. And there's even a movie that that can watch on YouTube called Street Punk Banda Aceh. And it's pretty good. I've made it through about 20 minutes or so, but I found that movie on YouTube, which is really easy to find too. And it's really good.
So after this, there was just widespread condemnation when the reports of the arrests and re-education went viral. Human rights organizations decried the illegal detaining of youths and the infringing of their freedom of expression, the violation of UN Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, and denying the punks access to legal representation. Punks took part in solidarity actions in central Jakarta, cutting their hair in mohawk styles in solidarity with the Aceh punks. There was a Seattle based metal and punk label, Aborted Society, that initiated the Mixtape for Aceh project on its website, calling on fans to create cassettes and CD compilations of punk music so the label could ship them to punk fans in Aceh. Also, if you look on like Google Podcasts, there are a ton of mixtapes from podcasts that just put music together in solidarity as well, that are documented and archived there. There are anarchist punks in Moscow who defaced the Indonesian embassy by spray painting a wall with slogans in Russian, reading "Religion equals fascism" and "Punk is not a crime." And Vice also has a 20-minute documentary. It's streaming online for free. It's called Punk Rock versus Sharia Law, where journalists highlight the impact of the Indian Ocean tsunami. They meet with some of the few remaining punks in Banda Aceh after the re-education. And it actually has like for me, I thought a very uplifting and inspiring message toward the end. So I think that's also a really good companion to learn more if you want to find that online.
You know what's really funny? We've talked about these stories in Iraq, we've talked about these stories in Indonesia, and we haven't talked at all about the lyrics yet. So let's get into the lines
Yeah.
of the lyrics, okay? So we have this first line: accept this moment, your spiritual cleansing as your hair falls to the floor. Consider this your conversion, your final warning. Recite these words as we clean you of your filth. I looked up this line, and in addition to the mohawk shaving and rehab camps I mentioned earlier, there's more to the story involving bathing, which you alluded to as well. And an article in the Washington Post by Elizabeth Flock in December 2011 reported, quote, dog collar necklaces and chains were thrown into pools of water for spiritual cleansing. And the rockers were forced to bathe in a lake, change clothes, and then pray. And you can find good pictures of this bathing in the lake. And police said they were morally rehabilitating the punkers because they had soiled the province's Islamic image. But something that was so interesting to me was throwing the necklaces and bracelets and stuff in the water themselves as
Mhm.
individual items, as if this one thing has like some kind of magical, mystical power inside of it.
Mm.
But the message society sends to young people or people who don't fit in is that society's problems are because of your wayward delinquency. And the use of your final warning here in this line is super eerie to me. Like when you consider what cops are capable of, and when given consent by the state and largely supported by broad swaths of society who wish for order and the stamping out of subservient sections of society because it doesn't suit them. And I wasn't really able to find much on people being brought to justice in the examples from Iraq above for the murders and deaths of the emos. So basically, all that needs to start happening is that the government gives a tacit approval, and then these folks just can start disappearing.
I really think, Greg, here that Todd's decision in writing the lyrics from the point of view of the re-educator adds like a weight and unease to the song. And after reading so many examples of the leaflets from Iraq or the statements from government officials in Aceh, his lyrics really feel like they were just directly lifted from audio recordings or video footage of this event. As the new arrivals, the punks are stepping off the bus to this place, like telling the song from their point of view, I think allows the listener to clearly see the intentions behind the arrests, not just in Aceh, but really in any top down attempt to squash individual expression and artistic exploration. And for me, in the Midwest, I've never, like, maybe aside from just kind of being judged by a grandparent for listening to obnoxious music, I've never had the state, right? Like state forces against me because of the music or the scenes that I occupy. So hearing that directed at me is the only time in my life I really have experienced that, because I've not had to worry about it in reality. And then so the next line, are you defying God? What are you trying to prove? Spare yourself the shame and yourself the sting of a rattan cane.
Guilt
And that,
trip.
geez, plus I just think the way that that last line there, the spare your family the shame, the way that's pieced together and phrased is just super, super good.
Yeah, it's like, think
And,
of your grandmother, think of your granny who you're going to
yeah, right.
embarrass. Does she deserve that?
I think that so the key moral panic theorist is known as Stanley Cohen. And Cohen suggested in a book called Folk Devils and Moral Panics that a moral panic occurs when condition, episode, person, or group of people emerges to become defined as a threat to societal values and interests. And he placed a lot of blame on the media in helping the spread of moral panics, which is, I think, definitely true in the US. There are like five distinct stages or events. One, there's an event, a condition, an episode, or someone is defined as a threat to the values, the safety, the interest of society as a whole. The second is that the media then amplifies these apparent threats through inflammatory rhetoric. There are portrayals that appeal to public prejudices. They create villains in a social, in need of social control, like folk devils, he refers to them. And then the victims, that's the moral majority. Then the third part is the publicity surrounding the threat creates a sense of anxiety, this fear leading to a public outpouring of concern from the people. Then the fourth is that the government responds to the public outcry, which in a way they kind of created, and frames the alleged threat as being symptomatic of a wider social malaise that must be addressed. And then finally, the moral panic and the responses to it transform the regulation of the economy and society with the aim of tempering public outrage. Like what really stands out to me is the fourth part, the gatekeepers of morality who define what is like morally and socially acceptable, and then they prescribe the solutions to fix whatever doesn't meet their standards. Moral panics, as described in the song, are really just about power.
Yeah, and it's an issue that is created by the state. It is then promoted to society as being something that is a far lot worse than it
Yeah.
actually is. So then the people in society demand that the state solve this like this manufactured
Mhm.
problem, which didn't even exist until the state said it existed.
It's like a Mobius strip or a Boris. It's just a circle, right? It just loops itself.
Yeah, and it's a way of creating people who will then become victims who are just literally living their lives, scraping themselves out of bed every morning, just like every one of us. And it makes me so sad to think about a manufacturing of a problem which creates
Mhm.
which creates people who don't deserve to be punished for things that they're like just living. And this reminds me so much of moral panics that are used by powerful people and groups against those who do something a little differently, right? The satanic panic in the United States, the vilification of quote unquote religious cults, who are oftentimes really just powerless groups of people who are tiny in number and are easy to vilify. And I've said this on the show before, but it seems like so much of life is humans that hate other humans. It's like
Mm.
it's like making other people look bad is like some people's meaning in life. And that is just so crazy to me. Like, this particular moral panic described in this song was also mirrored in other countries around the same time period as well. In 2008, Russia debated a law banning emo dress. Mexico saw anti emo riots that same year. Saudi Arabia arrested emo girls in 2010, accusing them of, quote, imitating men. More broadly, there were several of Iraq's Gulf neighbors like Kuwait, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates that have cracked down on women wearing masculine clothes or men dressing like women. And you know what's wild, dude? I actually lived in Mexico in 2008. And after reading all these stories, I had some serious memories that came rushing back of my eighth grade students asking me constantly, "Are you emo? What do you
Hmm.
think about the emos?" And I'm like, "Are you talking about Cap and Jazz and the
Yeah.
Promise Ring and Sunny Day Real Estate? What are you even
Right. Yeah.
saying? The
Yeah.
emos? Like, are you talking about like some like early Hot Water Music record? Like, are you
Yeah.
are you really an awesome kid? Like, what's going on?" And I was like, "Huh? What are you talking about?" And they were like, gays." And I'm like, "What?" And it was
Mm,
so baffling to me.
mm,
And
mm.
now to learn about what was happening around the world under the banner of the label emo and how it was just synonymous with hatred of gay people and people that are gender nonconforming or non-heteronormative. And that was just a really interesting memory of like
Mm.
being like, oh, my students were a part of this anti-emo craze as
Right.
well, and were constantly asking me, "Are you emo? What do you think about the emos?" And I didn't know they were asking me if I was basically gay to my face.
Mm.
um so then we have this next line. "This is the last night you'll sleep, corrupt and naive. You'll wake before the sun for your first steps down the path." And this is the kids falling asleep for the first time at the re-education center. And like, imagine being at a show at like 6:30 in the afternoon. You get arrested, you get drugged to the lake, your hair is shaved off, you're put into into the lake at gunpoint probably, and then you are put into a van, taken to basically like a juvenile delinquent center. And so you're at a show with your buddies, and then 6 hours later you're falling asleep in
Mm.
a large locked room. And since the re-education was military in style, the wake up time will clearly be before sunrise, because obviously everyone knows waking up before you've had enough sleep is the definition of manliness and power. The less you sleep, the more manly you are, listeners. So being forced to have little rest clearly makes someone more powerful and capable of resisting living an authentic life. So did you have any thoughts on that particular line?
I reference cognitive suicide. The lyrics, insular, pathetic minds try to cut you off at the knees so they won't be left behind. If everything is bland and unambiguous, maybe they can understand how they fit into this place. And Chris also sings in Zoocosis, when the operant conditioners come to break you in. So many forces in our lives want us to comply, to fit a mold, to conform to their will, to fix things about us that we don't want to have fixed and we don't need fixed. And the coldness of the lyrics here really stand out. I mean, especially since I work with kids. I get a strong sense, Greg, that a lot of my students are not used to adults just being positive to them
Yeah.
and being nice to them. When I talk to a student in the hallway that I don't know, almost always their reaction immediately is defensive because
Mm,
they're used to adults only talking to them when they've done something wrong.
Yeah.
So if I try to spark up a conversation with someone I don't know,
And then they're suspicious.
they're right away every single time. They're just not used to adults being positive or showing excitement in seeing them, or showing active and genuine interest in their well-being and their interests. So it doesn't seem there are enough adults willing to let them just be them and not police their every word and movement and action. And
Hmm.
these words dictate absolute control over the lives of others when they wake up, when they go to bed, and what they do in the entire time in between.
Yeah, and that speaks really well to the next line. Your childish dreams are gone.
Mhm.
This time must come for everyone. And I think about that a lot with my own child, who is very magical in her way of life and her way of seeing the world. She's really into fairies, and like she's really into like going into the forest with me, and like me pretending to be the king of waterfalls, and her being the princess of the forest and things like that.
Mhm.
And I just want to help her hold on to that as long
Mhm.
as possible. That is my objective, is to keep her a magical thinker for as long as I can, because she's 7, and like she might only have 2 more years of that. And as you think you're one of a kind, I see your type here all the time. And this reminds me of the line in Rock for Sustainable Capitalism from Potemkin City Limits: just because we were young, it don't mean we were wrong.
Oh, right, right.
And it's like this bullying thing too. The person who wields the baton or the gun or the handcuffs gets to dictate when a person transitions from being a person who has wonder
Mm.
views of the world towards being a person who has cynical views of the world. And it really pisses me off that people with those weapons and that power seem to be able to dictate when somebody moves from a childlike wonder view of the amazingness of being alive to just being a beaten down shell husk of a human being. And it really just makes me so sad.
Saying your childish dreams are gone, well, they're children. Like, they're telling them as children, you don't get to have these thoughts and these hopes and these ideas anymore. That forced conversion, not just through religion, but also into like adulthood. I think that bullying aspect is super important and not as heavy. But how many of us were told that the music that we like, or the concerts we would go to, were just a phase, and that we would grow out of it, that we'd grow up eventually? And there's also this assumption that built into this line here, that because people look the same, they have mohawks or tattoos or black jeans or chains. I see your type here all the time. That they are the same, that they're still not individuals, even though their fashion or their clothing or their appearance might be like someone else. And then, I am patient, I am fair, but I am tired of you.
Yeah.
This line to me is a response to the punks who were openly defiant, who were yelling "Punk's not dead" and refusing to comply and conform during the re-education.
Yeah, and it's the omniscient fatherly overlord notion. I know what is best for my children, regardless of their own hopes and dreams. And they will only tolerate so much shenanigans off the
Mm.
path of my omniscient knowing until I smash them back into place. And this almost reminds me of a Bad Religion lyric from The Empire Strikes First, because it sounds like they could almost go into the line, "And what I'm frightened of is that they
That they
call it
call it
God's
God's love.
love."
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like, punishing human beings in the name of God or power does not, in the long run, tend to get people closer to God. So you think that these punks, like, were immediately going to go out and like find God. So especially if
Mm.
demographic trends in religion in European and North America mean anything, actions like this only drive people farther away from religion in general. And then the line, "Your treatment is just, our conscience remains clear. Let us be judged in the ever after. I look at you and I see nothing but a fool." Your treatment is just. Our conscience remains clear. The first person point of view of the torturer here is so powerful. And Todd does this in other places too, to show the absolutely crystal clear idea that anyone is capable of doing horrible things to another human being. Picture the lyrics to Bringer of Greater Things. Look at
Yeah.
our collection of
Yeah.
hands, heads, and feet to see where we've been. Embrace this parody, the ending of things you can believe. We will drive you till your skin and bones. And when we finally reach the end, you will fall into our open arms, accept our tears of sympathy, make
Yeah.
way for our emptiness. You know what I mean? So,
Hmm.
same writing technique from the point of view of the conquerors, and it's rather stunning. But that's the only example I can think of right now. But that first person point of view is so powerful.
Yeah. Patient, fair, just, clear conscience. The rehabilitators would probably use all of those words to describe themselves and their roles in Aceh. And the same probably goes for the death squads in Baghdad. And the Vice documentary I mentioned also makes clear that most of, if not all, of the punks in Aceh were Muslim. I mean, they were pious, practicing religious individuals, but they just didn't subscribe to the militant and extreme version of Sharia law forced upon them. So it's not like these individuals are, anti-Islam. They themselves are religious individuals who that part of their life is important. But what happens then when that is stripped away, or that's twisted and then warped and then molded into something completely different? And so the last lines here, Greg, to help you understand, your roommate will tell you about his journey to free his soul. While you're listening, take a closer look at his arms, at his face, the gaping holes if he happens to crack a smile.
Mm,
And what a disorienting yet vivid end to the song.
startling.
I really tell my students a lot in their writing not to tell me something, but to show me their ideas. And this definitely shows, but my mental picture here might be a little different from yours. I mean, we know there's something on the roommate's arms and face, but it's in a way left to our imagination. If it's bruises, cuts, swelling, dried blood,
Broken teeth.
yeah. And this menacing visual of a young punk either being forced to smile or doing so willingly in a furtive moment of connection in friendship with someone else, displaying missing teeth from the beatings that he's endured. And in a way, leaving that up to our imagination, I think, is even worse. And that face sticks with me after the song ends, a face that's weathered and aged in just a few days' time, swollen or discolored, but it still has defiance in a smile because to the person, punk isn't a trend. It isn't a fashion. It isn't even a style of music. It's rebellion.
No matter what punishment they mete out on the so called offender, they can remind themselves of a specifically plucked verse from a chosen religious text to justify their punishments as well.
Right.
They can use a quote to fit a context of a specific situation. They can roll it around and they can logically justify it based on a particular line in a particular book in a particular place at a particular time. And they can
Hmm.
use it to dole out punishments which will physically hurt fellow human beings that they see as not being good enough, but
Right.
also to send a message to any future person who decides they want a mohawk or decides to skip church or
Mm.
masjid or who drinks alcohol or who is not a heteronormative biologically gender presenting person of the standard norm, right? That if they stick their head up, they will get hammered down from today's empires, right? And that
Hmm.
hammering will be righteous and in the name of God, whose wisdom has been passed on to these particular punishers who do this specific work. And man, it gets dark.
Hmm.
And that visual of the face is so startling and vivid. Something that I really love about this song is Todd writing from the point of view of a religious fundamentalist who doles out punishments, physically, mentally, emotional, in the name of being right regarding their viewpoint. This is common around the world, from examples like this to religious parents in my home state who torture their gay kids living under their roof into a life of shame. So there's
Yeah.
examples of this that you can find in every society. But yeah, what a song. What a song.
So that's what we thought about this song. Let's see what some people mentioned on YouTube.
So somebody on YouTube said possibly Propaganda's best song ever.
Ooh.
Interesting. Somebody also said, I'm not in love with this song, just saying.
Hmm.
Somebody else said, best album Epitaph has put out in years.
Agreed.
Definitely true. With the exception of Bad Religion Empire Strikes First, which was somewhat close to that, and New Maps of Hell, which I also love.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody said the ending of this song gives me chills, pure anger, which I completely agree because of that howling scream. And somebody also said prog metal masterpiece. What did you hear?
One just had the timestamp 247 of Todd's monster scream. And another comment said, that escalated quickly.
Well, Keith, do you have any takeaway final lessons here to lead us into the conclusion of our Rattan Cane episode?
Yeah, Greg, I came across a quote that really moved me. It said, kids don't just symbolize social change, they are it, embodying the unmanageable future. Visions of their out of control escapades sum up transformations in communities and economies that are too strong to resist, too rapid to comprehend. Sometimes like that social change is dressed up in punk and emo, metal, or other sub and counterculture styles and fashions. And what I'm left thinking about the most is how extreme music for me has been a luxury.
Yeah.
Spending music money on shows, going to festivals, band merch, records. While it is not a danger or a threat to call myself a punk where I live, like I've never had to worry about that. And I was chatting with one of our listeners, Matthew Siemens, about grindcore, and he shared with me some bands from Chile who were around during Pinochet's rule, like punk under Sharia law or emo in a militant theocracy, where it takes actual courage to openly resist and to defy authority. So punk isn't a list of the bands that you've seen or a number of the different vinyl pressings that you have of a record, but I think it's a life defined by defiance.
I keep thinking about how all societies have moral panics, how all societies have righteous indignation and transition periods where the problems of a society are placed upon the shoulders of people who have no power. Putting the blame for an amoral society on normal people who dress outside the mainstream expectations of a certain code, such as an officially Islamic nation or a nation where to be a man means only a tiny sliver of what is possible. It says a lot about the ways we lay the problems of humanity squarely at the feet of those who will bear a large burden, but who
Yeah.
have ultimately nothing to do with the large scale problems at hand.
Right.
Imagine how many other things could have been accomplished in Sadr City and Baghdad by the people who spent all this time rounding up and smashing in the heads of people wearing skinny jeans.
Right.
Imagine what they could have done instead.
Right.
You know what I mean? Think of the loss of human capital and human labor and time that goes in smashing in the heads of somebody wearing a particular cut of jeans. How tragic, how small, how boring can you possibly be that is where you are laying society's hugest problems at the feet of those kinds of folks? It's just such a shame. The wasted cost of human time spent on hatred and pain as opposed to a better future, it says a lot. So, Keith, why don't you go ahead and rate this bad boy for us?
Greg, I'm going to say it's a 4.5.
Mm-hmm.
It has incredibly vivid lyrics. It has heavy and complex composition. So many propaganda songs, it's timeless content. Even if the band is making reference to specific events, you could connect this to the 80s or the 70s, or you could connect this, I'm sure, to other places in the future. So I think this is unfortunately a song that is only going to remain relevant.
I think that I'm going to have a little bit of goofy fun with my rating here. I think I'm going to give it a 4.71. And I don't know why. I just think this is such an amazing song. And the topic is so unbelievable. That blast beat outro and that scream in and of itself, on top of the content that we've talked about and found in relation to this song, is just utterly baffling and mind blowing. And I'm so grateful to Todd for screaming his guts out at 247. So this has been our episode on Rattan Cane from Failed States. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks again to Derek Riel for coming on the show and chatting about propaganda with us. And if you want to find us, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at PropagandaPod. You can email us at propagandapod@gmail.com. And we will be back next time.